one man who has the power to release the files and get to the truth and bring justice to the survivors, and that's Donald Trump.
It's a crime if they don't. It's not like they're in contempt of Congress because they didn't respond to a subpoena. This is a new law.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Friday evening to you. I'm Stephanie Liebergen here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From reaction on newly released documents and photos linked to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, to what comes next for Republican map redrawing efforts as the Indiana State House rejects a redistricting plan backed by President Donald Trump. But first, let's take a look at some of our other top headlines today.
Washington state under a state of emergency from torrential rain that has sent rivers over their banks and caused mudslides to crash down on highways. Tens of thousands of residents are under evacuation orders. The Cascade Mountains already have seen up to 6 inches of rain in 24 hours. Now, Snoqualmie Pass picked up an additional 1.7 inches of rain. The flooding has caused road closures, water rescues, and the suspension of Amtrak trains between Seattle and Vancouver. Emergency officials are urging residents not to drive through standing water. Stay safe out there. Meanwhile, supporters rallied outside the Baltimore ICE field office this morning as Kilmar Abrego Garcia appeared for a scheduled ICE check-in just hours after being freed. You'll remember this is the Maryland man who the White House mistakenly deported to El Salvador. And now this morning, a federal judge has blocked immigration officials from re-detaining Abrego Garcia. The judge ruled that ICE cannot detain him until a hearing on the request submitted by his lawyers. Now, Abrego Garcia became a flashpoint in Trump's immigration crackdown, like I said, after being wrongly deported to a notorious El Salvador prison. At a news conference, he said he stands as a free man and will continue fighting what he calls government injustices. And the clock continues to count down on any kind of lifeline for healthcare subsidies after the Senate rejected dueling bills on Thursday. Those votes went largely along party lines, but a handful of Republicans did go along with the Democrats to vote for the Democratic effort to extend those Affordable Care Act subsidies. This all but guarantees that Obamacare subsidies used by more than 20 million Americans will lapse at the end of this year, just a few weeks away from now. And if ACA subsidies expire, families across the country will see their healthcare premiums spike. One family in Tennessee shocked to learn their monthly cost would quadruple. Scripps News Group's Kelsey Gibbs in Nashville has more about how that family is now facing decisions they never thought they'd have to make.
So I contract with a hotel. It can be anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months. And then I move on to the next hotel.
For Reagan Grossman, loving her job has never been the problem.
Which is really fun because I get to see a lot of our country.
She spent more than 20 years in hospitality, 7 of them working for herself.
It gives us flexibility that we want within our family. It's also been very lucrative. It's worked out well.
But working for herself also means Reagan has to buy her own health insurance. For years, the Affordable Care Act marketplace kept them within reach, especially because she has a pre-existing condition and her husband's former job didn't offer coverage. He's now retired. But lately, the cost of care has been climbing.
We were about $750 a month, and then we received a letter in the mail that said the tax credits are going away and your premium will be $3,090 starting January 1st.
The number stunned her.
I absolutely thought it was a typo at first. I thought for sure maybe I got someone else's that had a large family or something like that.
The spike is tied to premium tax credits set to expire unless Congress acts. Without them, families like hers face impossible choices.
And I never thought I would be in a position where I was questioning whether we could afford this. $3,000 a month for 2 people.
Now she and her husband are considering options they have never imagined.
We moved to Tennessee because I needed to be near my family, and I don't want to move. We don't want to move. I certainly don't want to switch my jobs. I love what I do.
More than 643,000 Tennesseans rely on ACA marketplace plans. Reagan says it's not perfect, but it's essential.
Does the marketplace insurance need to be fixed? Yes, but I believe it's an option our country should definitely have.
and she hopes lawmakers understand what's at stake.
So I feel like Congress is going to do the right thing. I hope that they are. I hope they see the need that millions of Americans need these tax credits to bring the insurance down.
Kelsey Gibbs, Scripps News Group.
Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed joins us live from our D.C. newsroom. So, Nate, are we just setting ourselves up for this battle to continue into the new year?
I think more accurately, Maritza, we're sleepwalking into Americans losing those health insurance subsidies and ultimately paying a whole lot more for health insurance next year. Democrats, Republicans were not able to reach any sort of agreement to come to some sort of solution here, to reach a bipartisan agreement to extend these subsidies or find something that would work in their place to cover that high cost of health care. Now, let's break down what those two votes were yesterday. We saw an attempt by Democrats first to try and extend those Affordable Care Act subsidies. That would have given health insurance to 4 million more Americans, put more Americans on the health care marketplaces. It would have added $83 billion to the deficit over 10 years, but it would have extended those premiums for 3 years, keeping more Americans enrolled. Republicans, a bit of a different possible solution. They had this plan led by Senators Crapo and Cassidy. The goal here was to put money in individual Americans' HSA accounts if they're enrolled in the Affordable Care Act. Those individuals would get between $1,000 and $1,500. But critical poison pill here, Republicans said that money cannot be used for abortion, so reproductive care services, or gender transition services, gender-affirming care. Also, no extension of current Affordable Care Act subsidies. For that and many other reasons, that plan dead on arrival. In fact, the Democrat-led plan received a handful of Republican votes. Can't say the same thing, but the Republican plan. Where did this leave us on Capitol Hill? Well, back exactly where we started. Democrats and Republicans pointing fingers at each other over this failure to address the cost of health care. Take a listen. Can something be done in a week now?
Well, the Democrats have shown no willingness to do that recently or historically. I mean, you got to remember, we're in this healthcare mess because Obamacare was passed.
The reality is the President of the United States has got an iron grip over what the Republicans in the Senate do and what the Republicans in the House do. And he's telling them, don't do anything.
And again, it's really hard to see what the future path is going to be if President Trump does not get involved. He has not been involved up to this point. He's thrown out some ideas about health insurance, but he's not come out with a comprehensive solution that he's looking to accomplish here. So again, really hard to see, Maritza, how we're going to be able to find some sort of common ground in just 1 week on an issue that has divided Republicans and not been able to unite Democrats and Republicans for much of the last decade.
Even longer than that, probably. Nate, let's turn now to the redistricting effort that was voted down last night in Indiana. Let's talk about the reaction we're seeing. Big step in this continued conversation about redistricting efforts ahead of next year's midterms.
Yeah, a lot of frustration, not just from President Trump, but also from Capitol Hill about Republicans in Indiana failure to redraw their state lines to give Republicans 2 more seats in the Hoosier state. Take a listen.
Disappointing to me, but as I've said all along, whatever the maps are that are presented by every state, I have to win those, and we will. So I guess that's a disappointing outcome in Indiana, but there's about 14 states at some stage of the process now, either litigation or redistricting, so we shall see.
You had one gentleman, the head of the Senate, I guess, Bray, whatever his name is. I heard he was against it. He'll probably lose his next primary, whenever that is. I hope he does, but because he's done a tremendous disservice.
President Trump targeting the state Senate President pro tem directly there, saying he should be primaried. A lot of frustration among Republicans about this a redistricting situation in Indiana. To be clear, there's a whole lot of other states that are likely going to have their say as well. Virginia looking at redistricting, Illinois looking at redistricting. A whole lot of states where this is still a real possibility. Again, a lot of questions about what effect this will have on the midterm elections when Democrats appear to be favored, at least on the general ballot right now, to do quite well. But at this point, President Trump venting a whole lot of frustration, also distancing himself, saying he was not really involved in the effort. He did post a lot on Truth Social about his desire for Republicans in Indiana to get in line.
Scripps News congressional correspondent Nate Reed for us. Thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks, Marcy.
Coming up on Today's It Happened.
We knew Instacart was running experiments on shoppers and had acquired in 2022 a new AI pricing company, Oversight, to get better at running these experiments on shoppers.
Welcome back to Today's It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories.
U.S. Food and Drug Administration intends to put a black box warning on COVID-19 vaccines. Those appear at the top of prescribing information for medicines, and it is the FDA's most serious warning, intended to warn about risks like death or life-threatening reactions. The plan has not been finalized, and it could still change, but it is expected to be unveiled by the end of the year, just a few weeks from now. This is a story we've been covering this week. Instacart using artificial intelligence to charge different customers different prices for the exact same items. In a new study, researchers followed more than 400 shoppers and found up to 5 different prices for identical products at the same store on the same day. Price differences averaged 13%, but some customers paid 23% more than others. So joining us now to talk about this study and what it uncovered is Lindsay Owens. She's the executive director for Groundwork Collaborative, one of the 3 organizations that collaborated on this study. So Lindsay, this story shocked me when I heard it this week. Tell me what the catalyst was that prompted this study to even be done, that helps people figure this out.
So we knew Instacart was running experiments on shoppers and had acquired in 2022 a new AI pricing company, Oversight, to get better at running these experiments on shoppers without their knowledge. So we developed an idea to turn Instacart's experiment back around on them and recruited, alongside Consumer Reports, more than 400 volunteer secret shoppers to run our own experiment. And what we found is we had individuals put 20 items in an Instacart grocery basket, take screenshots, and crunch the numbers. And we found huge differences. For more than 75% of the items in the grocery carts, different consumers were offered different prices for the same item, same pickup location, same time. The differences were not small. Sometimes there was as much as 23%. So one customer paying 23% more than another for the same item, same store, same time. We also estimate, using Instacart's own numbers about how much a household of 4 spends on groceries in a year, that this Instacart tax could cost families up to $1,200 a year. You don't just buy one grocery item. You buy a whole basket. You go to the grocery store once or twice a week all year long. So even these small price hikes really can add up for families at a time when groceries are already unaffordable and prices are so high for food in this country.
And so, Lindsay, I'm just wondering, do we know, have you analyzed what kind of factors would have caused prices to go up or down? Do we have any idea, or was it random?
I think it was probably random. We looked at a whole host of demographic data that we collected. We looked at data on whether or not you were a frequent Instacart shopper or not, and we didn't find differences based on those categories. However, in Instacart's responses to Consumer Reports and Groundwork and More Perfect Union, who worked on the study, they did say that the consumer packaged good companies collect behavioral data on consumers that is used in promotional decisions. So it may very well be the case that type of personalized pricing, where your data is being collected and then turned against you, is happening. But in our study, we don't find it in this case.
Did they say anything? Has Instacart responded at all about what could justify this?
Yeah, so Instacart has responded, and they've confirmed our findings. They don't deny that they're running these experiments. They do, however, say that they feel like the price increases are negligible. And they've said that they prioritize affordability, that they don't use personal data in pricing decisions. And I think the question ultimately is up to the American consumer whether or not they think $1,200 a year in grocery price hikes coming from these experiments is a lot or a little. And I think most of us would say a lot. So yes, Instacart more or less confirming our findings, but sort of differing in their opinion of whether or not these experiments are a problem. The other thing I'll say is experiments like these, particularly ones being run without our knowledge, are incredibly deceptive. And on Instacart's website, when they talk about the underlying technology that powers these experiments, they suggest that this is really this secrecy, the fact that we don't know we're being experimented upon, is a feature, not a bug of their approach. But I do think this type of sort of secret exploitation, it's not just bad for shoppers on Instacart, it's bad for all of us. The key to a healthy economy is fair and honest and transparent markets. And when companies like Instacart deploy new technologies in ways that undermine that fairness and transparency, we all suffer.
I mean, you talk about using our info against us, right? And we are also reliant on these on our smartphones. Yeah. How can we make sure that we're not being scammed on this new world that we live in, where we are so reliant on our phones and our habits and patterns are being monitored?
Yeah, look, Instacart is running these experiments to figure out the maximum amount they can charge us. And they're using our data as part of that calculation, as part of that determination. Ultimately, I don't think it should be up to every consumer in this country to figure out a hack so that they don't get ripped off, to duck and dodge and bob and weave and figure out how to beat the machine. This is why we have laws to safeguard our markets and ensure transparency. And so I really think it should be up to policymakers here to take a close look at this. Attorneys general should pursue investigations of Instacart and determine whether or not these pricing experiments may already be illegal under current law.
We'll be right back with more of today's top stories on Today As It Happened. For staying with us on Today As It Happened. I'm Stephanie Liebergen with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
We want to talk now about the latest on the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Today, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited his own troops near a frontline town after recapturing several settlements from Russia. Scripps News international correspondent Ross Cullen joins us now live from Paris ahead of peace talks tomorrow. So, Ross, let's first start with Zelenskyy's visit. What does it mean?
Yeah, Maritza, that's right. The Ukrainian president in the town of Kupiansk today in the northeast of Ukraine, near the country's second city, Kharkiv, and this is meant to demonstrate and push back against the idea that it's only Russia that is making incremental gains. At the moment, that has been the messaging coming out of Moscow, particularly in the direction of the White House, to convince the United States that Russia wouldn't want to freeze the conflicts on the current front lines of contact because Russia is making gains every day, pushing incrementally inside Ukraine. So this visit by President Zelenskyy to push back against that message, show his forces are continuing to defend land in the east of the country as diplomatically the discussions get underway and continue to see if there is a way forward for an official peace accord.
Now, Ross, Zelenskyy said the U.S. wants a peace agreement from Ukraine, by the Christmas holiday. So what are you looking for tomorrow? What do you think we can expect from these peace talks in Paris?
Well, I think what the United States would like at the very least is the confirmation, an official agreement signing off on the wording of any peace accord, even if there is no official signature from Mr. Putin or Mr. Zelensky on that document. At least if they can agree the wording, that's what the United States would like to see. What we're going to be watching tomorrow, Maritza, here in Paris, the French capital, to see if it's going to be Marco Rubio or Steve Witkoff leading the conversation. That's the first thing I'm going to look for. I was in Geneva the last time we had such discussions at the end of November, and then it was the Secretary of State who was leading the negotiations. But since then, it's been the Special Envoy and President Trump's son-in-law and former Special Advisor Jared Kushner who've been the 2 point men in Moscow, and they've been back at the front of the negotiations. So it'll be interesting to see if it's Mr. Witkoff or Mr. Rubio sitting down in face-to-face with the Ukrainian, French, German and British counterparts. And they'll be also analysing President Zelensky's new peace plan that went to Washington this week. He suggested some possible new concessions in the east of Ukraine, territory that's recognised by the UN as Ukrainian, where Ukraine currently holds the territory. President Putin would like that handed over to Russia. President Zelensky doesn't want to do that, of course. He suggested that both sides could vacate the region. It could become a new free economic zone, and that potentially would be financially attractive to the self-styled deal-maker-in-chief in the White House. Maritza?
Wow, a lot to follow there. Ross Cullen live in Paris for us. Thank you so much, Ross.
Straight ahead on Today's It Happened.
I think anything that we release is significant. I think people should be able to make judgments on their own as to what they see in these photos.
Continue to follow breaking news surrounding convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Now, House Democrats released never-before-seen photos from Epstein's personal collection. They show him alongside powerful people like President Donald Trump and former President Bill Clinton. Now, the release didn't include any context or dates for the individual photos, but they show wealthy, powerful people spending time with Epstein. There are thousands of photos that haven't been released yet. We have a team covering this story for us. Haley Bull is standing by live at the White House, but I want to start with our Alex Miller in New York to break down exactly what was and wasn't released and what we know about it. Alex?
Well, Steph, there is a lot that we still do not know when it comes to the context of these photos. Remember, only 19 photos were released, and we heard from the top Democrat on the committee who says that they got 95,000 photos late last night. They say they've combed through about 25,000 of them and that we'll be getting more in the days and weeks ahead. But let's talk about what we have seen so far. There are multiple photos of President Trump ranging, it looks like, from many different years. They are photos of him pictured with women whose faces have been redacted. There are also photos of him, what looks like on a plane, if we have those photos, to show you of another woman whose face is redacted. And then there's another photo of him with Jeffrey Epstein himself. So that is what we have seen from President Trump. There's also photos of President Bill Clinton, also with Jeffrey Epstein, as well as other major figures in the world, including Bill Gates, including former Prince, now had his title stripped, Andrew, as well as other major leaders from different, realms, including Richard Branson and Alan Dershowitz, one of the president's confidants. All of these people have been pictured, but we don't have any context in terms of what these photos represent. Are these just photos that are coming from the Epstein estate that don't have any real relevance into the investigation? There are photos of women, but as far as we can tell, these are not underage girls. And we do not know exactly when these photos were taken, who took these photos, and where some of these photos were taken. There was also photos of Steve Bannon, one of, obviously, the president's confidants, somebody that Jeffrey Epstein was working with in those later years. And that photo in particular is an interesting one. You can see there's a frame on Jeffrey Epstein's desk, and it looks to be a woman who has her face redacted, who is also passed out. Here's a mirror selfie of Bannon and Epstein. And we were able to catch up, our Hill team was able to catch up with the top Democrat, Robert Garcia, about this whole release. Listen to what he said.
I think anything that we release is significant. I think people should be able to make judgments on their own as to what they see in these photos. For us, this is about transparency. If we receive information or pictures or anything else, videos that we put out last week, and I think it's important to note that it's been Oversight Democrats that have fought every single time to release all this information. And there is a White House cover-up happening right now in not releasing these files that needs to end. There are women who were raped when they were children, who just want justice.
And Steph, Garcia is calling for President Trump to release the rest of these files today. He says some of these photos that we have not yet seen are disturbing. There are also photos that they did release of sex toys, which we did not decide to show here on camera because there's not any context with them and any real connection to the photos of the wealthy and powerful men that we have seen there today. And I think it's important also to note that we are approaching the 1 week, or it is the 1 week rather, deadline for the Department of Justice to release any files relating to the Epstein investigation. Now, we can expect those to be redacted, but the Department of Justice has to send over all of those files also to the House Oversight Committee per a subpoena, unredacted. So any photos that we've seen today that are redacted have been redacted by the committee themselves versus what we will, in theory, get from the Department of Justice. They have their own rules for what they can and can't redact because of the law that was passed and signed into law by President Trump nearly a month ago.
Those photos certainly seeming to show different decades from Epstein's life that certainly appear to be a large range of years, especially the ones President Trump appearing to be older, those Steve Bannon images appearing to be a little more recent. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller will stay on top of this, as there is certainly more to come, not only from House Democrats, but as you mentioned, that DOJ release as well. But I want to go now to our Scripps News White House correspondent, Haley Bull, who is live outside the White House with hopefully a little bit more about what the White House is saying about this new photo release. Haley?
Stephanie, we haven't heard President Trump weigh in directly on the matter today, but we have spoken with a White House official who reiterates that no documents have shown wrongdoing from President Trump, accusing Democrats of selectively releasing photos for political purposes. And as Alex just ticked through, some of those photos do include images of President Trump, which adds to previously released emails that show a mention of him, but neither show any wrongdoing. A spokesperson tells us in part today, quote, "The Democrat hoax against President Trump has been repeatedly debunked, and the Trump administration has done more for Epstein's victims than Democrats ever have by repeatedly calling for transparency, releasing thousands of pages of documents, and calling for further investigations into Epstein's Democrat friends. It's time for the media to stop regurgitating Democrat talking points and start asking Democrats why they wanted to hang around Epstein after he was convicted." Now, President Trump initially in his term directed the Department of Justice to release credible information and supported the unsealing of grand jury testimony. But as time went on, we also saw him start to accuse Democrats of what he called a hoax and seeking to distract from what he views as his administration's accomplishments, and initially warning Republicans in that vein as a discharge petition neared before ultimately supporting that vote as it neared the finish line. And previously, as we have talked to folks here, Stephanie, one official in previous times had maintained to us that the president's position hadn't changed, that he had always been committed to transparency and taking a different tone when it comes to the Democrats. But again, an official we spoke with today says that none of the documents prove any wrongdoing against President Trump. President Trump, over the past several months, has been pressed on the Epstein files by reporters. And several months ago, one of the quotes he said was that he had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, reiterating his claim that he threw him out of his club many years ago. So we do expect to see the president later today, and we'll certainly have our ears open for anything he says to add more context to this.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull, I know you'll be up live and on top of it for us this afternoon. Thank you. Coming up on Today As It Happened,
Scripps News with newly released video of the Washington, D.C. pipe bomb suspect. I'm Lori Jane Gliha. Ahead, a closer glimpse of the man who is accused of placing explosive devices at political headquarters.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened, Scripps News end-of-day snapshot of our biggest stories. So let's pick up right where we left off. A 6.9 magnitude earthquake shook northeastern Japan Friday, causing small tsunami waves but no apparent damage. It hit off the northeastern coast of Japan's main island and triggered a tsunami warning that was lifted after a couple hours. A 7.5 magnitude earthquake hit that same area on Monday. That one injured at least 34 people and caused minor damage. Authorities have warned of possible aftershocks and a slightly increased risk of a megaquake. Preservationists want a federal court to halt President Trump's White House ballroom project until it goes through proper reviews. The National Trust for Historic Preservation filed a lawsuit today. It claims the president violated federal environmental and administrative laws by fast-tracking construction. The ballroom would be nearly twice the size of the White House, at least what it was before the East Wing was demolished. Trump says the project is overdue and is being paid for by private funding, but the trust argues the federal laws still apply. Scripps News obtained new video of the Washington, D.C. pipe bomb suspect who was arrested earlier this month. I want to bring in our Scripps News senior national investigative correspondent, Lori Jane Gliha, who has this exclusive reporting. So, LJ, how did we even find out this new video existed?
Well, Stephanie, we always go searching for anything that gives us a more complete picture of the person who's been named by authorities. And in this case, we have literal pictures. New video of a car crash from 2024 in which police captured his face on camera.
Is everyone okay? Anyone hurt? Okay, officer. Everyone's all good?
Police responding to a Virginia traffic accident in 2024 captured these images of Brian J. Cole Jr. more than a year before federal authorities took him into custody and accused him of planting pipe bombs near Democratic and Republican headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Lapse in judgment. I was looking for a place that I could, go on to the next lane, and then just one small lapse in focus, and I just crashed behind him.
Cole was driving the blue Nissan Sentra when he rear-ended the truck in front of him.
If you would have left some space, you wouldn't have rear-ended the vehicle. Does that make sense? Okay? Yeah.
A police officer wrote him a ticket that day for following too closely behind the other vehicle.
I see that you do have a good driving record. You have 4+ points, which is good. You ever gotten a crash before?
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah, I've been through this process before.
The consequences of this non-criminal offense are minor compared to the federal charges Cole is now facing. Court records show he's charged with transporting an explosive device with the intent to kill, injure, or intimidate, or unlawfully damage or destroy any building, vehicle, or property. He's accused of placing the devices one day before the Washington, D.C. riots in 2021, when thousands of people stormed the U.S. Capitol ahead of the certification of President Joe Biden's election.
And we did reach out to the person who is listed as Cole's attorney in court documents, and he has not yet responded. Cole is scheduled, Stephanie, for another hearing on the pipe bomb charges later this month.
Scripps News senior national investigative correspondent Lori Jane Gliha, thank you as always for your fine reporting. Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
I see people who may very well have been engaged in personal relationships. I see people who may have been engaged in professional relationships. I see redactions which by default make you think, uh-oh, what are we hiding? There must be something nefarious. But if you believe in due process, no matter whether you love President Donald Trump or you abhor him, this by itself does not move that ball from a criminal perspective.
You're watching Today As It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's dive right back in. King Charles announced Tuesday his cancer treatments will be reduced in the new year. The British monarch crediting early diagnosis and effective intervention for his positive prognosis. Charles made the announcement in a recorded broadcast as part of his campaign for early cancer screening. The king disclosed his cancer diagnosis nearly 2 years ago, but did not say what type of cancer he has. And newly released images show convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein with powerful people in his orbit. House Democrats released 19 photos, but didn't provide any dates or context. The release comes ahead of next Friday's deadline to release all the documents associated with the Epstein investigation. And now I want to bring in Jeremy Saland, a former criminal defense attorney, former Manhattan prosecutor, here to help us understand what is and isn't in these photos. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I want to start, if you'll put on your prosecutor hat. What do you see in these photos as a prosecutor?
So I see a lot of political gravitas and weight. I see something that can be embarrassing, and I see a lot of heavyweight people who are going to come up and bring forth their response or reasoning and say, take me out of the picture here. But from a criminal perspective, both as a prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, and I am still a criminal lawyer, I don't see anything that really moves that ball to probable cause that Donald Trump or someone in that picture, those pictures, committed a crime. I do not see certainly proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is higher, that one of these people committed a crime. I see people who may very well have been engaged in personal relationships. I see people who may have been engaged in professional relationships. I see redactions which by default make you think, uh-oh, what are we hiding? There must be something nefarious. But if you believe in due process, no matter whether you love President Donald Trump or you abhor him, this by itself does not move that ball from a criminal perspective. And what will and would is potentially the actual files themselves that the Department of Justice can release, and statements from the victims, the complainants, who might say, this happened to me and that was the person who did it.
Well, we keep getting information about Epstein little by little, sometimes from House Republicans, sometimes from House Democrats. So this story keeps being in the headlines. How does that impact the court of public opinion? Does the constant, headline, do the constant headlines keep pressure on the DOJ to actually release as much as they can?
Well, Donald Trump has been trying to block this, and in fact successfully has for a long time. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the sort of the casualties and the disposable casualty to Donald Trump, because she wanted to protect and help these women who were victims, and she should be applauded for that. But I'd also add that the carve out in the legislation, which again was not needed because Donald Trump has the ability to release anything that would not necessarily impact a witness or a victim, carves out for ongoing investigations. And we heard from Pam Bondi a while ago, a few weeks, maybe a month or so ago, saying that there was potentially a new investigation. So there's a reason why this is being held back. And I would add, when you look at the Donald Trump pictures, they look like they predate, I think it was 2008 when Jeffrey Epstein was initially convicted. They predate that time. But the Steve Bannon pictures certainly look like they could be after that time or around that time. And the question becomes, even if Donald Trump was not involved, were the people around him involved? And is that why Donald Trump has been trying to keep a lid on this? There's a lot of questions, and it's just feeding the speculation, doing no favors to Donald Trump and his team.
I had that same observation when I was looking at the photos. It's clear that President Trump was much younger when a lot of those photos were taken, but I had the same thing. The Steve Bannon photos look much more recent, just purely, those are simple observations. What other simple observations do you take away from what you saw in these pictures?
Keep in mind, again, this is coming from the estate. This is not actually, again, the file, the investigatory file. But as you noted in the beginning of the interview, you weren't discussing anything about the actual, showing some of the more, when I use the term graphic, they aren't graphic images, but sex toys and things like that, which demonstrate there was things going on. And if there's consenting adults, that's one thing. But that underlying sentiment here, or what's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, at least in part with Jeffrey Epstein, is that there was sexual crimes committed. And if these were the tools, which again, consenting people, that's one thing, adults, that's one thing, that these young women and girls were subject to. What would be interesting to know, if one of these girls in one of their statements referenced one of these items, that now we can see as corroborated in that it exists. It gives more credibility and a foundation to what they are saying. So when you look at the pictures on an island, you look at the items that we're taking a picture of, meaning the people and the toys and things like that on an island, they don't necessarily move that ball. But when you looked at that in conjunction with what we hope we will see at some point as the public, potentially statements and more evidence from that file, putting this piece together will shed a light. And Donald Trump and the Department of Justice should be doing this soon, because it's only hurting him. And more importantly, it's hurting these women who need to have their voice heard.
So, presuming the Epstein files do get released, we're likely to get thousands of pages potentially all at once. What are you going to be looking for once that document dump happens?
Well, if we get the actual, again, the statements with the FBI, for example, by complainants, by these young girls, even if their information would be redacted, which it should be. If there's other investigatory leads from witnesses, maybe people who were working or on Epstein Island or just with Jeffrey Epstein. Even that picture with Steve Bannon, and you have that redacted woman's face lying down. We don't know if she was passed out. It could have been a good friend who was just close to him and putting her head on his lap. We can always speculate, and that's not fair. And I see the image coming up now, but it would be interesting. You would think that if Steve Bannon was standing right there, yes, it's facing the wrong way, but whoever took that picture, if it was really as bad as it may seem in this picture we are seeing, the picture of the girl, then someone must have said something, and Steve Bannon must have seen it. You can't guarantee that, and you can't confirm that, but it really gives you questions, and we would want to know what corroborates this by other testimony, by other witnesses, by people who work there, and by other pictures. So there's a lot to be seen, and it's going to come out, at least from Congress and the Democrats and the House Oversight Committee, sort of slow bleed, drip and drab. And I think realistically for political reasons, but it should just be done to let these young women who are now adults move on and try to get closure and confirm accountability where it's necessary.
So next Friday marks the 30-day deadline from when President Trump signed that Epstein Transparency Act bill into law. So next Friday is the deadline to release the Epstein files, whatever is involved in those files. What happens if the documents aren't released? What type of enforcement mechanisms could exist?
Well, I said this before, and I don't know if I said it to you or somewhere else, but I think there will be compliance, but they will not be compliant. There's vastly different terms and used very differently, meaning meaning the Department of Justice, will comply with the rule of law in this particular case that the president had to sign off on. And I said this earlier in the interview, there is an out, which is if there's an ongoing investigation. And there may have been another out too, I don't recall. And Pam Bondi already referenced that. So if anything is withheld in terms of the investigatory file, that the Department of Justice file, the fallback is going to be there is an ongoing investigation and they're looking into other players or people. So therefore, we are not going to release maybe the most damning or the most embarrassing evidence out there. We're going to hold that back.
Criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Jeremy Saland, as always, thank you so much for sharing some of your expertise with us this afternoon. Thank you for spending some of your evening with us on Today's It Happened. I'm Stephanie Liebergen, and have an excellent Friday night and a great weekend.